I think we can make a start. Welcome everyone to this meeting of the Planning Committee. Before we start, I just would like to mention, and obviously my fellow councillors, we are well aware of this. Unfortunately, one of our colleagues, Councillor Markham Spalding, died peacefully but suddenly on Thursday night. Malcolm served on the Planning Committee in various forms throughout his entire service as a councillor. He was committed to residents and businesses in Earl's Court, which he represented, and he also acted as chairman of the Public Realm, as it then was, and then the Environment Committees on the Council. I think we should all express our condolences to Malcolm's family, his many friends, and also residents in Earl's Court who would have known Malcolm very well. So if I could ask everyone, please, if you don't mind, if we can stand just for a few moments to recall his service to our Royal Borough. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So if I can start by asking, are there any apologies for absence? There are none. Are there any declarations of interest? There are none. Now, if I can then move on to, we have two sets of minutes that I think we need to approve. The first is from the meeting on the 18th of November. Colleagues, can I have your agreement that I sign those as a record of the meeting? Thank you. And similarly, we have the minutes of the meeting on the 9th of December. Is that agreed? Thank you. So our first item of business is a report on appeals decisions, and I think Lisa Chung, Lisa, you're going to introduce this, aren't you?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, that's correct. The paper before you this evening is for appeal decisions between June and December of last year, and it relates to appeals that were allowed. So you'll see there are a total of 25 out of, and I haven't put that in the header, but the total number of appeals in that period of time was 64. So in terms of the ones that are allowed, you're looking at around 39%. And the report sets out the individual decisions with the key findings and then our commentary and our reflections. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have on any of the individual cases.
Any questions or observations? Emma?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It just seemed to be very high. Is it high in, it felt very high, and I'm trying to remember what sort of proportion we've had before of appeals agreed, because it did seem, I don't know, are the goalposts moving? And I was sort of reading through them all, rather depressed and wondering what we're doing here when so many of our decisions are overturned. So is this unusual, or am I just imagining it?
I wouldn't say it's an unusual amount. I mean, generally, and I can pull up the statistics for you, on average, it's around between 30 and 40% allowed. We will have some months where we might have certainly more dismissed than allowed, but this isn't an unusual amount. Obviously, within the paper, you'll see that there are a number of decisions that weighed very heavily in terms of context, so where we've taken a view that an extension may well be inconsistent or out of keeping. And the inspector just hasn't agreed and has referred to other examples that they have then given significant weight to in their decision making. And you are going to have an element of those with every round of appeals that we get. In terms of learning, From these ones, obviously there are a couple of enforcement cases that are unfortunate for us, particularly Debenham House, and there are a couple of partially allowed appeals which then count as an allowed appeal, which is again unfortunate. So there isn't anything particularly surprising in this set of appeals. It isn't something that we're overly concerned. In terms of appeals, the key performance indicators that we are monitored against by government, the
inspector often agreed largely with the council, but they still count as an allowed appeal for various reasons. There was one, I think, where we'd failed to give our decision within the statutory period. What happened there?
Thank you, Councillor O'Connor. That was 54 Camden Street. Now, this was quite a unique case in that it was on an agenda for a planning applications committee. And as you may know, we're undergoing some significant IT changes in terms of the technology we're going to be using. And so in the background, there's a testing environment, as you would expect. Unfortunately, this testing environment then moved to a live case, and it happened to be this one, where it issued a decision by mistake. So a decision was then sent to the agent suggesting that permission had been granted because that was the recommendation. We then had to withdraw it from the agenda because even though we could explain it was a mistake, outwardly it doesn't look particularly good. And in the meantime, rather than wait for another committee, the applicant decided to appeal against non-determination, which was, you know, that it's their right to do that. We then brought it to committee because where we receive appeals against non-determination, we are required as a local authority to tell the inspectorate what decision we would have made, and because we had more than 3 objections, it would have been a decision of the committee. So on that, it was the committee would have refused planning permission, but obviously in this case it was an allowed decision. So quite a bit of a backstory to that one, but that's what happened there.
Thanks very much. That's very helpful.
Thank you, Chairman. I had 2 quick questions. First one, in terms of the percentages, which I think you said was around about 1/3 were overturned, presumably that's 1/3 of the number of cases that were actually appealed, rather than 1/3 of the cases that were turned down.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. So as sort of looking to Emma, your question, is in terms of a percentage of cases that the committee turned down, and I don't expect you to have that on hand, but it would probably be less than 1/3, fewer than 1/3 were overturned.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's the same with other refusals that aren't committee decisions, that actually a lot of them aren't always appealed.
Yeah.
You will find that an applicant will resubmit or come in with a different scheme.
Yeah.
So it doesn't follow that a refusal always leads to an appeal.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. And the other question, just looking at 10 Roland Gardens, which had applied for change to residential use, and they won that on appeal. I would just be interested in the sort of, I know there's some commentary in the paper, but your thoughts on the sort of implications for us. Should we be putting more weight to, I think the inspector mentions that it used to be a residential property, it then became office and is returning to residential, and therefore is set out, you know, very well for residential. And that wasn't his only reason or her only reason, gave a couple of other reasons as well. But do you think we should perhaps be giving a bit more weight to that when a property used to be residential and just wants to return to its original use?
I think in terms of the principle of its former use, not necessarily, but I think where it is important is in terms of the layout of the site. So the interesting point here is that the inspector commented about, you know, access into the office space and its viability in the long term as an office, and noting that, of course, that layout is very much how it would have been as a residential unit, and that, you know, that's understandable. So I think where we do need to be quite careful is with change of use applications, thinking quite pragmatically about the long-term use in its current use and what we are trying to protect. And I think that was quite a key point from this one, is that actually its use as an office is somewhat limited, and the inspector gave more weight to that in this instance.
No, thanks. I agree with Councillor Bennett's point there about change of use. I think we have to be a bit careful here. Just a couple of quick points. I think the Camden Street overturn, if you like. I think that was a rather strange set of circumstances. The more general point, I think, is the appeal that we have lost on Rutland Mews South. I know a lot of residents don't like air conditioning units. They are generally unpopular with neighbours. But I think we do perhaps have to note that when things are appealed, inspectors, putting it crudely, they wonder what's the fuss about. And I think that's a fact that we, to some extent, we just have to take on board a bit. I don't know what comments you would have about that.
Yeah, I agree, Chairman. It's an interesting one because the committee's concerns were about the number of units, and actually on the face of it, 7 units to serve a residential property does seem like quite a lot, but actually the noise report was very clear in that those units would meet the council's noise criteria, and that the conditions that we put on most applications for plant would be robust enough to deal with any potential noise issues. So I think it's quite an interesting one that actually we do need to kind of move away from potentially the fear of too many units if actually the noise report is quite clear that they would all meet the required noise standards.
Good. Thank you very much. Any other points? No. That's very helpful. Thank you so much. So if we can now move on to consider first the application at the, well, it's part of the former part of the Barbie School. And I think Laura Fogarty, Laura, you're going to present this, aren't you? So please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman. This application relates to a development site located on Barbie Road and Treverton Street. Before I begin my presentation, I want to draw the committee's attention to the addendum report, which contains amendments to conditions and clarifications on the main report. The application site is bound to the north by Barbie Road and to the south by Treverton Street within the Dalgarno ward. The site is bound to the west by the re-provided Barbie Primary School. The plan above shows the application site outlined in red and the ownership boundary in blue. The site is currently vacant following the clearance of the site to accommodate the new Barbie Primary School to the west. The site previously contained part of the former school building and an area of playground. The site is not located within a conservation area, and there are no listed buildings located in proximity to the site. The boundary of the Oxford Gardens Conservation Area is located west of the site. This street view image shows the northern boundary of the site fronting Barbie Road. Predominant building heights in the immediate vicinity vary between 2 and 6 stories. The street view image shows the southern boundary of the site at Treverton Street. An existing community garden is located at the southwestern corner of the site. The application proposes 83 homes over 4 residential blocks varying between 3 and 7 stories. An indoor sports facility and flexible studio space is proposed at buildings A and B. It is also proposed to extend the existing dental surgery at 351 Ladbroke Grove. In addition, it is proposed to create a new pedestrian route across the site from Barbie Road to Treverton Street and extend the existing community garden at Treverton Street. The site forms part of Phase 2 of the Council's New Homes Delivery Programme and would deliver 83 homes towards the borough's housing supply. Blocks A, B, C and D are centred around a communal landscaped courtyard. A new pedestrian route is proposed to run through the site from Barbie Road to Treverton Street, and this will run parallel to the central courtyard. The landscaped lower level courtyard is located at the centre of the blocks and will be the primary amenity space for residents. The garden will be accessible to all residents and will incorporate hard and soft landscaping features and informal play equipment. The landscape courtyard benefits from natural surveillance from the surrounding blocks. A shared podium garden is proposed for the exclusive use of blocks A and B, featuring a central lawn space surrounded by planting. Landscaping is also proposed across the pedestrian route, running adjacent to blocks A and B, and landscaping enhancements are proposed to the existing community garden. A plaza area with a central tree and planting is proposed to the north of the site fronting Barbie Road. The proposals achieve an urban greening factor score of 0.43, therefore exceeding the target score for predominantly residential developments in the London Plan and the Council's greening SPD. 62% of the proposed residential floor space will be affordable housing. Of the proposed affordable floor space, 82% is proposed for social rent and 18% for intermediate rent. The proposed amount of affordable housing therefore exceeds the requirements set in the local plan and London plan. The existing educational use of the site will be lost, however, the school has already been re-provided to a much higher standard, and no part of the re-provided school would be lost as part of the proposals. The requirement for an indoor sports hall was set by the Department of Education as a result of the disposal of the land. The proposed sports facility therefore complies with this requirement. This drawing shows the site-wide elevations from the south and shows the proposals in the context of the existing street scene. The heights of the proposed residential blocks are consistent with existing buildings, including the adjacent Treverton Tower, which sits at 11 stories, and the terrace properties on Ladbroke Grove. This drawing shows the site-wide elevations from the north, with the north elevation of Building C in the centre and Building B to the right. The proposed blocks are shown in relation to the terrace properties on Ladbroke Grove. Oops. Sorry, it has jumped a few slides. Oh no. Apologies, just bear with me one second.
That's okay. Yeah, let's just take our time to try and see if we can. I know there have been problems, unfortunately, with the technology. Let's just pause and we can sort this out, I'm sure.
Thank you. This slide shows the view from Treverton Street looking north along the pedestrian route with blocks A and block D visible. This slide shows the view from Barby Road looking south towards blocks B and C. This image shows the view from the junction of Ladbroke Grove and Barby Road looking towards block C. This image shows the view of buildings A and B from Barby Road looking west. This image shows the view from the re-provided Barby School towards buildings A and B. The podium garden is visible between the two blocks. Finally, this image shows the view from Ladbroke Grove looking towards Treverton Street. It is considered that the proposals incorporate high-quality, sustainable, accessible, and inclusive design that responds appropriately to the local context and character of the surrounding area. The proposals would enhance the quality of the street and local townscape. As a result of the development, there would be no harmful increase in the sense of enclosure or overlooking, and the privacy of neighbouring residents would be retained. The development would not compromise the reasonable enjoyment of the use of buildings, gardens, and other spaces. The new homes all meet or are in excess of the minimum and national and minimum London Plan space standards. The new homes respond to the size and shape of the site, and the layout is optimised to provide dual aspect for 80% of the units. The apartments themselves are well laid out with an openness to allow flexible living arrangements for future occupiers. The majority of the single aspect units are 1 and 2 bedroom units, which also benefit from south-facing positioning with views of the shared courtyard. Each dwelling will have access to an internal landscaped courtyard, which is accessible to residents only. Shared internal amenity space is provided on the first floor of blocks A and B. All of the proposed units benefit from private amenity space in the form of inset or projecting balconies, terraces, or dedicated ground floor amenity areas. The site has a moderate level of access to public transport, with a public transport accessibility level of 4. No off-street car parking is proposed, and the development will be permit-free with a low number of vehicle movements generated by the proposals. As such, the development would not create any additional pressure upon the transport network. The development provides sufficient cycle parking and refuse and recycling storage to serve both the residential blocks and the sports facility and studio space. The proposal is acceptable with regards to climate change, sustainability, and other environmental matters subject to conditions. In conclusion, the proposals will deliver much needed and high quality social and market housing at an appropriate unit mix for the area, and will deliver 83 homes towards the borough's housing supply. The proposals will deliver a high quality indoor sports facility to serve the existing Barbie school, as well as for community use. In addition, the design of the proposals is high quality and would enhance the existing townscape and create a new landscaped public pedestrian route. As such, the development complies with the development plan, and subject to planning obligations and conditions, the scheme is considered acceptable. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much indeed. So, colleagues, questions? Emma, do you want to go first?
Thank you, Chair. And so I couldn't actually hear you very well, and I just have to say, as a point, that we can hardly ever read the words on the plan, so I was struggling a bit trying to work out what is where, but I think I'm just about getting there. I don't, however, understand where the sports hall is. Is it under the garden, the podium garden? Where is the sports hall?
Apologies. Yes, the sports hall is located between buildings A and B, and it's underneath the podium garden at basement level.
Okay. So there were a lot of comments I was just reading. Obviously, we need this. You know, I do understand all of that. And we've got a decent amount of social housing, which is a change. But I have got some questions. And the quality review was quite revealing. I mean, one thing is, you know, everybody says that these buildings respond to local context and they all look exactly the same. So that's a bit disappointing. I just think they look boring, actually. But there are some very specific points. One of them was about the sort of management of the public route through the block, and if it would be open all the time, and about sort of safety for that at night, and if it would be lit and so on. A lot of my comments actually are about the public realm. Shall I go through one by one, or shall I give you a list? I don't know what you'd prefer.
If you go through it one by one, I think that'll be
Okay,
easy
so
for you to
the
address.
public
Thank
route
you.
through the space and to the school gate and the safety of that.
So this will be secured by a condition. If you bear with me one moment, I can find the condition for you.
So I really can't hear you very well.
Sorry. Sorry. The management of the public pedestrian route will be secured by a condition. Over to Lorna.
Sorry, there is a condition in the addendum, but it's also going to be covered by the section, sorry, I shouldn't say section one, by the unilateral undertaking. There's going to be an undertaking that the council, as the freeholder, is going to give to the council as the local planning authority, and that deals with a pedestrian route.
So who's in
it's
charge
going
of
to
it?
be dedicated as a public... Sorry, can you not hear me?
Not very well. It's always very difficult when we're sitting in a room.
sorry.
So who is managing it, and how is it going to be managed? That's what I'm concerned.
Well, it's going to be adopted.
Okay.
According to the Section 106 heads of terms, it's going to be adopted as part of the public highway, and so it will just be maintainable at the public expense.
Okay.
It's not going to remain private, so there won't be a management issue.
Okay. All right. Okay. The other one, there's quite a lot of discussion about the public realm, but also activity on the Barbie Road at Block C, and the problems there of that facade on Barbie Road, which is a kind of the back of the building rather than the front of the building. And I don't know if that was resolved, because I can't actually see in these images, and I can't really see over there either, if there was any changes to the problems with Block C on Barbie Road, or if it was going to be mostly a huge block with small windows, because that's a shame to make that bit of, you know, it's a missed opportunity, I feel. So what's the situation? Is it as was, pretty much? There's not an entrance or any more activity on Barbie Road? Because I couldn't actually see on the images.
I'm very sorry. Would you mind repeating the question?
Block C onto Barbie Road, that facade, which is pretty much a blank wall apart from little windows, and I don't think there's any entrance or anything. The quality review, that they were suggesting that it would promote activity onto Barbie Road and make it a pleasanter realm, if you like, rather than having one blank wall with little windows in. So that is as it is, that remains as it is. There's been no change there.
Thank you. If I can answer, it's not a blank wall, but you're right. It is punctuated by openings, and work was well, discussions were had with regards to activating that frontage. But as proposed, it isn't. It is windows looking out onto it. So it's not a blank frontage as such as just a blank
I
wall,
realise
but
that.
it has openings. But you're right. It doesn't have entrances and exit points. No.
Okay, right. And then there were suggestions for having trees and so on, or widening the pavement. That clearly hasn't happened. And I couldn't quite understand this issue about what was a private or semi-private garden. So is it the case that the podium garden, shall we call it, is for blocks A and B only, and that the central courtyard is for C and D only? I'm not quite clear on that.
Apologies, I don't think I made that clear. The podium garden will be accessible to blocks A and B exclusively, and the central courtyard garden will be accessible to all residents of all 4 blocks.
Okay, but and also to people passing through, presumably, so that the courtyard garden is also accessible to people going to meet their kids from school who are a bit early, they can sit there or something, or is that... It was the query about it being private, semi-private is the issue, I think.
Okay, so the central courtyard is a private space only accessible to the 4 blocks. There is a pedestrian route which runs parallel to the central courtyard, which is accessible to the public. However, the garden itself is fenced off and is only accessible by the 4 blocks. So it is a private space.
Okay. Okay. And then there was another issue about the western elevations that they couldn't see. So the elevations looking onto the school playground of A and B, presumably they are, again, mostly a plain wall with window openings. And that's it, is it? Because there was quite a lot of criticism about it's just rather bland. That is as is, as well. There's been no changes there, as far as I can see.
Yes, so in paragraph 6.131, you'll see that blocks A and B have been designed so that the elevation facing the school, and it's a secondary elevation in nature, so it is largely blank, but it's with secondary windows. So there are other windows serving those blocks that are considered to be the primary windows, and that's been done bearing in mind the relationship with the school.
Absolutely. It is also the facing west, and there's lots of light. I don't know. I just find that a bit strange because there are ways of protecting it. As above St Thomas's School, they have terraces, but with tall privacy screens and so on. But anyway, okay. I think that's all my questions for now. Thank you. It's more about the public realm and how the dynamics work, really, that I'm concerned about, and I'm still concerned about. So thank you.
Thank you. I just got a couple of quick points. I think generally speaking, the design and the images we've seen, I think look very good. But I think a lot of the actual quality depends on the materials being of the right materials being used. And I think condition 4, we've got sample panels and that kind of thing. So we're going to make sure that this is actually, were this to be approved and actually built out, that it's going to actually look a very high quality building. Is that right? We're confident that that is achievable, basically.
Yes, that's correct. We will be securing the materials by condition and they will be approved by us.
No, that's good to hear. The other point I wanted to raise, this is section 7 of the report, where it has, there are various details of the proposed agreement. I don't know what colleagues feel, but I mean, I think the idea that there might potentially be a requirement for a public art contribution of £557,000 or more, I mean, that seems an enormous amount to my mind. Now, I'm very happy to take advice on this. It might be, I know there's a caveat that I think elsewhere in this draft, obviously this is just the draft of an agreement, that something might be agreed otherwise, This is item 28 within section 7 of the report. But I think demanding a sum of money like that just seems, I think, completely out of scale and unacceptable, particularly when there are also reference under economic development obligations. I mean, there are important training in employment and business strategy, benefits that could be achieved. There's employment. I mean, this is a building contract, potentially. Opportunities for people who live within the area. It just seems to me that, at the very least, perhaps, we should minute the fact that we feel that this particular indication of a £500,000 public art contribution is not perhaps very sensible. I don't know, maybe colleagues will want to follow on from that. Who would like to go next with questions? I think actually, Maxwell, you were first, and then Charles, why don't you?
Thank you, Chair. I'd agree with comments of Demcode in terms of the design is quite generic. But then again, Husband is right in terms of we won't really have the proof of the pudding in terms of until we see samples of it. What I was trying to understand is in terms of the colouring of it, is it trying to match Barleby School on one side, then trying to match, I think, the opposite block? Is that the rationale behind the colouring scheme? Because the buildings are slightly different colours, is that right?
You are correct. The buildings are different colours. Blocks A and B are proposed for a pale cream brick, which would tie in with the school buildings. Blocks C and D are proposed in a mixed red brick, but obviously this would be confirmed by condition 3.
Okay. Yeah, that was my particular comment, to be honest.
Thanks very much. I agree with Councillor Husband about the public art contribution. That seems an exorbitant sum, and we should minute that we disapprove of that, I would suggest. Then the other point I wanted to make was about the aesthetics of the scheme. I'm afraid I find it rather depressing, actually. It's blockish, and I think could be a much higher quality scheme on the aesthetics. I just don't think it's necessarily going to age very well. I think a couple of the buildings look all right with the sort of stock brick type finish, and I'm glad to hear that'll be conditioned. But the building that's sort of broadly white, as Councillor Bennett and I were just discussing, is going to end up sort of looking dirty, and I just don't know what it's going to look like sort of 10 or even 50 years down the line, and think at this height, which I think is a very good height, we could have done a bit better and come up with something less blockish. And I think the QRP report is weak on this, actually. There's an awful lot of coverage of the function and way the building is going to operate and way the wider scheme is going to operate. But there's very little on whether it's actually an attractive building or set of buildings. And I'm not sure it is as a result, possibly, of that QRP failing. So it's a comment, really, more than a question, but something I think we ought to take into account. Thanks.
Do you have any comment in response to that comment? Is there anything you'd like to add? Laura?
I don't have anything to add, but Lisa, would you like to add anything?
I mean, just to clarify, what was the proposed brickwork for the, I guess, the lighter blocks? What was it again? Was it a pale cream brick? Yeah. So, I mean, you know, the reason we put these conditions on is to make sure that the final materials used are of an acceptable quality, and that those sorts of things in terms of weathering are things that we will look at.
I really hope I'll be proved wrong and that it will look better than I'm imagining it might, but and I know officers will work very hard to make sure that the materials used are as high quality as they can be, but I just have slight doubts about the aesthetics of the overall scheme. I think the function looks to be great, and it's admirable that we're contributing 83 new homes, but just think we could have possibly done a bit better on the aesthetics, but I appreciate it's a highly subjective point.
Yeah, I was just going to add on the sort of same line of questioning, really, when looking at, so this view particular, which is view from Barlby New School towards buildings A and B. This sort of CGI image is almost a bit dazzling. I think it's perhaps slightly overexposed. And it looks very white. I'm pleased to hear that it will be brick, sort of cream or sort of white brick, rather than just sort of a plain whitewash. But what can we specify in terms of sort of cleaning regimes? Because as Councillor O'Connor said, if that starts to get dirty, it's just going to look horrible. And therefore it does affect the aesthetic and the look and feel of the area, and thus I think is a valid planning concern. So are there requirements in terms of cleaning regimes for something, particularly something as white as that?
Cleaning isn't something we usually condition, and I think the main reason being is that I think a degree of weathering and ageing of brickwork is something that we would prefer to see across the borough. The problem with cleaning, and you'll see it in certain examples where buildings have been cleaned in the borough, that they then look, I'm trying to think of an appropriate word, but they can be over-cleaned and look very brash and brilliant in their approach. I think what we could do, potentially, if you would like to see more information at the condition stage, is perhaps weave in somewhere appropriately about details of weathering and looking at other examples of that brickwork that has been used over time, because there always is, and for officers to take that into account to see actually how something can weather over time, and then we can take a view as to whether or not that is something that would be acceptable for that building in that location. I would urge probably not to go down the cleaning route, because it can lead to further problems. Yeah.
That sounds very sensible, and yeah, I mean, mandating how something's going to be cleaned for the next 80 years is a lot harder than just getting the materials right in the first place. So that sounds very sensible to me. And yeah, just something which will continue to look good over 20, 30, 50, hopefully 100 years. And second question, looking at the same aspect, that view sort of across the playground towards buildings A and B. One thing that concerns me there is it's quite blank, and it's at ground level and even at first floor level. And when looking at the drawings, that's even accentuated a bit further. I'm trying to find the right page. Bear with me. Yeah, so that's on at least in our pack on the drawings. I don't think they're, well, I'm sure they are labelled, but I can't see. But it's the second last drawing. Just says site-wide west elevation. And that's, yeah, sort of that frontage at ground and first floor level, I think, is really important for how people on site sort of interact with the buildings and experience it. And I just wonder, I mean, it's probably hard to do at committee stage, but if anything can be agreed with the applicant, RBKC, and the architects to liven that up and make that more, I mean, I'm not an architect, so I don't know all the right terms, but interactive and just sort of appealing to people there at ground level, rather than what's currently quite a sort of blank functional ground and first floor. That's certainly something I would encourage, and I don't know if other members of the committee would agree with that.
Yes, I think I'd go along with what Councillor Bennett has said there. It may be that it's something which maybe it's a piece of detailing that if we were to approve this, it could come back to us, perhaps. I think just following on actually both Councillor O'Connor and Councillor Bennett have picked up on this idea that the actual materials that are used in the building, that we have to be very mindful that we really want something which is going to look good in 50 years' time. And I think, I don't think anybody on the committee has the expertise to be able to give a definite answer about this, but I think as part of the conditioning, and I'm not sure it's necessary perhaps to amend condition 4, but I think the substance of what we are requesting is that we need to choose materials that are actually going to weather well and are going to remain looking good for a couple of generations, really. I don't know, officers, do people think this is possible? Is that something reasonable that we can do? And do we think condition 4 does cover this?
I think it is certainly something we can weave into condition 4. I think as condition 4 is currently worded, it's probably not explicit enough to capture, I think, the concerns that you're raising. So I probably would add something in there around weathering or something like that. I would suggest that we do that, because as currently worded, it doesn't make that, it doesn't highlight that. Yeah.
Chair, can I?
Emma.
Thank you. I just want to add quickly that if anyone wants to see how that kind of colour of brickwork weathers, just over the road, the new bits of Wannington Green have very similar, very, very light coloured brick. And any kind of ledge or overhang, they are dark and smeared, and they just look really grubby, and I think it's a huge shame. I don't think we should be making up that, it's a dirty place. We've got the railway right there and very busy traffic routes, and I just think we're asking for trouble, and they're not going to age gracefully like stock brick at all. They're just not, and I think that's a huge mistake. But I also agree about the issues about the sort of ground floor activity and surveillance and so on. That's a huge missed opportunity to make it a bit more lively, to create natural activity on the ground floor, and that will actually could potentially create problems, especially with the route through and the semi-private communal garden and so on. I think that's a huge shame. But certainly the brickwork, it's a Wannington Green. Any ledge or overhang, it just looks grubby already, and that's 6 years.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other questions? No? Okay. In that case, we need to think about making a decision. I think we should take on board Lisa Chung's point about, I think condition 4 should be strengthened to make it quite clear the durability of the building through its use of materials. I think that needs to be strengthened and made quite explicit. I think the point about activation, which Tom made, I think that's something which probably can be addressed in due course. And if it's necessary for something to come back with a minor amendment, then I suspect that's probably the best way of dealing with that issue. We've talked about the public art contribution. I think that could probably be something left for the minutes. What do people feel about this? What's the feeling? Charles? Yes, I think I'm thinking of condition 4. Yes, exactly, because that relates to the materials that are actually used. Yeah.
I was thinking 3A.
Well, there's that as well. I mean, all of the conditions that relate to the actual materials. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if we could strengthen 3 as well.
Yes, I think that would be reasonable. Yeah. Okay. Good. Maxwell, and then Emma.
Thanks, Chair. My opinion of this is, with strength conditions around the type of materials used, overall the benefits are large in terms of the new units of housing and the new space provided. I live actually very nearby this property, so I will see it myself quite a bit. But yeah, the design I think could have been better, but we live in the now, and this is the application in front of us, and with I say the conditions strengthened a bit on terms of the materials, it is reasonable, and I would support it.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. If this was a private development, I'd be tempted to suggest that we defer, because there's so much that could be so much better. We desperately need social housing, so I think we missed a lot of opportunities here, and it's disappointing, especially coming from a very, very good local architect who designed the school. I think it's very disappointing, actually, but I don't think we've got time to defer. We don't want to lose our funding on this one too, do we? So I'm going to reluctantly support it.
Okay, all right. Tom, Charles? No, fine. Okay, in that case, before we take a formal vote, can I just check, Lorna, we're quite happy that the recommendation is to grant, and with the unilateral undertaking that's set out in the report, and we're happy about that, and obviously the amendments to conditions that we've discussed. Is there any point you need to add?
Not really, Chair. I mean, the point about public art has been noted. The heads of terms are there. Yes, it's just subject to the conditions, amending conditions 3 and 4, and subject to the undertaking, but that's all fine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so in that case, the recommendation in front of us is to grant with the undertaking and amendments to conditions as we've discussed. Can I see those in favour of the recommendation, please? So that is agreed. Thank you very much. If we can now move on to consider the application at Kensal Road, and Laura, that's you again, isn't it?
Thank you, Chairman. This application relates to a development site on Kensal Road. Again, before I begin my presentation, I want to draw the committee's attention to the addendum report, which contains amendments to conditions and clarifications on the main report. The application site is bound to the north by Kensal Road, to the west by Bosworth Road, and to the east by a public footpath and Homefield House. The site is bound to the south by the Grade 2 listed Church of Our Lady of the Holy Souls, which is marked on the site plan. The site itself is not within a conservation area and is not near or visible from any of the borough's conservation areas. The street view image shows the view of the site from Kensal Road, located on the northern boundary of the site. Homefield House and the adjacent public footpath can be seen adjoining the site. The Grade 2 listed church can be seen to the rear of the site. The current permission has been implemented and is currently being built out on the site. This image shows the northwestern corner of the site at the junction between Kensal Road and Bosworth Road. The listed church can also be seen from this area. Planning permission was granted in November 2020 for a Part 7-storey, Part 5-storey building providing 37 residential units and community and retail space at ground floor. This application seeks to make various amendments to the approved scheme and provide an additional residential unit. The application seeks to make various internal reconfigurations to result in the creation of an additional unit. The internal changes will comprise the reconfiguration of Unit 504, which was previously a duplex unit, to create a one-bed apartment over a single floor. Units 501 and 502 will be reconfigured to incorporate the former plant space. These units will remain 4-bedroom and 2-bedroom units respectively. In addition, a new 3-bedroom unit will be created at 6th floor through the repurposing of the former plant space and the use of the 4th floor space previously a part of Unit 504. This unit will be accompanied by private amenity space in the form of a new terrace visible from the eastern elevation of the building. It is also proposed to increase the height of the roof above the plant room by up to 1.25 metres in response to acoustic insulation requirements. This slide shows the eastern elevation under the approved scheme in comparison to the proposed eastern elevation. The eastern elevation is shown here as this is where the external changes are most visible. The proposed terrace serving the proposed new unit can be seen at 6th floor level. The terrace will be accompanied by windows and doors to match those already approved. The increase in height of the lower roof, situated above the plant room, can be seen from this elevation. The proposed increase in height is considered appropriate and in keeping with the remaining building. The lower roof will continue to sit well below the upper roof, maintaining the multi-level appearance. The design of the proposed amendments respond appropriately to the local context and character of the surrounding area and the nearby Grade 2 listed church. The increase in height of the lower roof is not considered to have a notable greater impact upon the character and setting of the church. Additionally, the proposed terrace at 6th floor level is consistent with the design of the approved scheme and as such are considered acceptable. The proposals also optimise the potential of the site to deliver much needed affordable housing. Proposals would not result in any harmful increase in sense of enclosure or overlooking, and the privacy of neighbouring residents would be retained. As such, the proposed amendments to the approved scheme would not compromise the reasonable enjoyment of the use of buildings, gardens and other spaces. In conclusion, the proposed amendments to the approved scheme would deliver an additional unit for social rent, contributing to the supply of affordable housing in the borough. The proposal also optimises the potential of the site to deliver an additional unit for private amenity space. As such, the proposal is compliant with the development plan and the statutory requirements to preserve the setting of a listed building, and subject to planning obligations and conditions, the scheme is considered acceptable. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Any questions at all about this? No, there are no questions. Thank you for the presentation. I think this does seem as though it's a very modest reconfiguration, really, to create a new unit, and I'm not really sure that there's a great deal to discuss, to be quite honest. Does anyone have any comments or any questions? Otherwise, I think we can probably move to make a decision. No, okay. I think before we make a decision, I'd just like to note in the addendum report, there are various amendments to conditions, and I think we should note those. So we need to have regard to that. In that case, I think the recommendation is to grant permission. Can I see those in favour, please? So that's granted. Thank you very much indeed. So we are nearly at the end of our meeting. I'd just like to conclude this. It is quite likely that this will be the last planning committee before the borough elections on the 5th of May. And I'd just like to thank everyone who served on the committee during this past term. In particular, I'd like to thank Councillor O'Connor, the Vice Chairman, who I know is not standing again for election. The rest of us, God, or more precisely the electorate willing, may well be back, but who knows. But I would like to thank everyone who has served on the committees through these past few years and thank them for their service. Thank you very much indeed. And that concludes the meeting. Thank you.